Welcome to SBC This Week, a weekly news roundup from across the Southern Baptist Convention featuring interviews with today's top church leaders. I'm Brandon Porter. Laura Erlinson is here with me today. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Brandon.
How are you?
I'm good. We have not been in the office together in a while.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we've had a couple of days here. It's good to be back on the podcast.
Yeah.
We were on spring break. Our family was this last week, and then your family was 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, tis the season for that. It's
Yep.
good. It's been nice to get away and spend some time with them and do some fun stuff. Of course, we are preparing for Easter weekend as we record this, and so a busy weekend for church leaders, for pastors, just for Christians in general who are active in their local church. It's probably a busy time. Thursday night services, Friday night services.
Sunrise
Sunday,
service for me.
that's
Are
right.
you doing a sunrise service? I'm doing a sunrise service.
Yeah, we're not. We do a Good Friday night service, and then we do a breakfast instead of Sunday school on Sunday morning,
Okay.
and then we have our worship service on Sunday morning. So, yeah, so a little bit different, but a
Yeah.
lot of fun. How about you guys?
Well, I am singing at a sunrise service, which is always fun.
Okay,
Geez, you have to get up at like 4 so that
Yeah.
your voice is actually
to wake up.
functional by 6 o'clock.
Uh-huh.
But it's really, it's a very sweet. It's at a really big funeral home. Well, you know the funeral home in Madison with all the military graves on one side of the road.
Right.
Yeah, Spring Hill, and they have a really nice service every year. So I'm helping lead the worship at that, and we'll probably have all the neighborhood kids over for an Easter egg hunt that afternoon. We always do that too. So it's
Yeah.
a busy day, and then I leave Monday morning to go to BCA in San Antonio.
So what is BCA?
Baptist Communicators Association.
Yeah.
Their annual meeting, workshop, whatever, is next week, and it's always a great time. But it always is exhausting because Easter Day is exhausting for me. Like there's just a lot.
Yeah,
When I get
long
up
day.
Yeah, but I'm excited. Lots to look forward to.
Absolutely. So I'm sure next week on the episode, you're going to hear some highlights from BCA and maybe even some things that Laura picked up that she could share with us that would be helpful to folks in communications ministries, not only in entities, but in churches as well. So we need to make sure to remember that, Laura, and talk to folks about that.
Yeah, we will for sure.
Share that info. Well, we're going to talk about a few things today that we think will be interesting to you on the podcast. The Serve Tour came ashore recently in Virginia Beach. That's in Virginia, in case you're wondering. And so we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Also, we have trustees reports from Southeastern Seminary and also from the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. We'll be talking about those. And then also, as you might expect, the importance of talking about the resurrection, of placing a focus and an intentionality on the resurrection. We'll touch on that a little bit later in the podcast. First up, though, we want to let you know about our sponsor. Our sponsor is the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. They want you to know that a remarkable discovery near Jerusalem is shedding light on a pivotal moment in biblical history. Archaeologists in Israel have uncovered evidence of King Sennacherib's military campaign against the kingdom of Judah dating back over 2,700 years. Now, Laura, this makes me think about Teeman Knight, who is my professor of Old Testament at the Extension Center in Birmingham, Alabama for New Orleans Seminary. And I'm sure I've answered some questions on a test from Dr. Knight about King Sennacherib. That's right. Yep. So in the Bible.
I remembered how to spell it with my daughter this week.
That's right.
Because I had a great Bible teacher named Mr. Damron, and
there you go.
I knew how to spell Sennacherib.
Yep, there you go. So Sennacherib, Nebuchadnezzar, those are names that are, once they get in your brain, hopefully they stick and you can spell those. Anyway, Sennacherib was one of the most prominent Assyrian kings, and he led a campaign against Jerusalem during the reign of King Hezekiah, also a great king in the history of Israel. And that story is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 18 and 19. You may be familiar with that. Among the discoveries are 180 stamped impressions on ancient storage handles, many of them inscribed in Hebrew with the phrase belonging to the king, directly referencing the kingdom of Judah. Judah. The artifacts will be displayed to the public for the first time at the J. and Jeannie Schottenstein National Campus for the Archaeology of Israel in Jerusalem. The folks at the Tourism Commission say leading a trip to Israel is more than a tour, it's a spiritual investment. And so you can learn more about that at holyland.israel.travel. holyland.israel.travel. So we thank them for sponsoring the podcast. Well, Laura, we just can't get away from starting the podcast without a mention of the SBC annual meeting, which is just weeks away in Dallas, Texas. And believe it or not, we have a presidential candidate. That should not be a surprise to folks, I guess. Yeah. It's none other than
just the one so far.
That's right.
There probably won't be another one. You never know.
That's right.
But yeah, just the one. So the last few years, there's been lots. There's been several years where we have a lot of candidates.
Yep, that's right.
But of course, Clint Pressley, who is our current and has served one term, almost a full term so far as SBC president, North Carolina pastor, will be re-nominated. It was announced officially this week. Texas pastor Michael Kreiner announced that he will nominate Clint Pressley to serve a second term as SBC president. He said, "It is my honor to nominate him. And while this renomination is no surprise, it is coming after sincere prayer and ongoing conversations with a wide number of SBC pastors." And so Michael Kreiner is preparing to do that in the annual meeting. And of course, you have to be there in the room to vote.
That's right.
Go ahead and start making your plans if you haven't already.
Yep, absolutely. So looking forward to that. Let's touch on these trustee stories, Laura. First one comes from not far from Clint Pressley there over in North Carolina, and that is Southeastern Seminary. They held their trustee meeting April the 14th and 15th, and they had some good news. President Danny Aiken there announced that they're continuing to see positive trends and growth there among the student body at Southeastern.
Yeah, that's been kind of a recurring theme among all of the seminary reports so far. We've had several, and they all have seen enrollment growth, which is very encouraging. Southeastern also has redeveloped their MDiv a little bit. We had another story today in BP about that. It goes into a little more detail about the differences in the MDiv core there at Southeastern. But it's also growth overseas. Southeastern is, as far as I know, the only seminary that has a master's and a bachelor's degree completely in Farsi. And so they have students in Iran and other places that speak Farsi, and they can get these degrees completely in Farsi. And so that program has seen some growth as well. Trustees were unanimous in all of these decisions, it's always encouraging to see the trustees voted unanimously to do this and unanimously to do that. They approved several updates and revisions to the curriculums, including a new Doctor of Ministry in Chaplaincy and a new DMin postdoctoral certificate, a Master of Theological Studies to DMin track for international students. So just a lot of new offerings. And then, of course, some 2 faculty promotions that were announced as well. And more than 40 students were commissioned to the mission field at the trustee meeting as well. So just, exciting stuff there in Wake Forest.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those faculty promotions, Laura, is John Burkett, and he was promoted to associate pastor of rhetoric and composition. And when I think about that title, I think I've raised some children who could be an associate professor of rhetoric. Not so much on the composition at times, but definitely the rhetoric.
Yes, I tell you what, they get pretty skilled in the rhetoric at about
yes,
13.
They do.
Yeah.
That's right. Those teenage rhetoric meisters. So anyway, all right. Well, moving on. ERLC trustees, they met as well in this last week since we've been with you on the podcast, and they met via Zoom for their spring meeting. They communicated some updates of what they've been up to. One of those is communication with President Trump's transition team to communicate the ERLCs, which ultimately is Southern Baptist policies, their policy priorities, I should say. They've released the ERLC 2026 2025 public policy agenda, which is available at their website. They're also participating heavily and just very outspoken in an effort to continue defunding Planned Parenthood. I just saw an article today, Laura, not from Baptist Press, but from another source, a secular source, that I think it said 12 Planned Parenthood clinics have closed so far in 2025 across the United States. So Planned Parenthood is feeling the effects of
and
some
the
of this
Supreme
push.
Court, will weigh in on that here in just a few months too.
Yeah, absolutely. They share details of a recent pastor's advocacy trip to Washington. We did have a story about that in Baptist Press, where pastors from Texas met with Speaker of the House Johnston, Senators Ted Cruz and James Lankford. And then they also talked about 5 Supreme Court cases that they're currently engaged with. We've been following along those at Baptist Press, and the emphasis on strengthening church engagement. And Dan Darling is joining alongside to help and lead in that initiative for the ERLC. They also talked about the recipients of a couple of awards. Laura, these are things that they do annually.
Yeah, and I loved both of these, very deserving. The John Leland Religious Liberty Award was not given to an individual. It was given to a group of people. It was given to Christians in Nigeria. The honor is awarded to a person or group that has been a courageous champion of religious liberty, both in the United States and around the world. And if you follow Baptist Press at all, it's not unusual to see a story, usually from Diana Chandler, about persecution in Nigeria and what Christians in Nigeria have endured over a long time now, decades. And so that was neat to see the ERLC recognize them for their steadfast faith in the face of such persecution. And then the recipient of the Richard D. Land Distinguished Service Award was Jonathan Skrmetti, our very own Attorney General here in Tennessee. And well, for me, not for you, because you live in Kentucky, but for me. And you also have seen his name many times in Baptist Press, because he is representing the state of Tennessee and several other states in a case in front of the Supreme Court about transgender issues, and basically attempting to outlaw transgender surgeries, medical treatments, things of that nature for minors. So the Supreme Court will weigh in on that too. And we're actually running a story about this soon, maybe next week or the week after, but he will be appearing at the annual meeting. Jonathan Skrmetti will be at the annual meeting at an ERLC hosted event talking about this Supreme Court case. And it's going to be, I think tickets maybe are already available. Like, you can already go ahead and get your reservations. So I would encourage people to look into that and be looking at BP for a story about that pretty soon.
Yeah. All right. So a little bit more in that story if you want to go check it out. But those are some of the high points from the trustees meeting for the ERLC. And you can find that story at Baptist Press. Sort of staying in this vein, Laura, of gender identity that we were just talking about there with Jonathan Skrmetti, sweep out to Colorado, where this week the House of Representatives there passed a bill that would create legal grounds for the state to strip custody from parents who legislators say misgender their children. Now, we don't do that just for the sake of the Colorado House of Representatives, but specifically we mention this because Brent Leatherwood and the ERLC, and also Mike Proud, who is the state exec out there at the Colorado Baptist Convention, they are helping to give voice to this, to push back on this. That this is some honestly, it's just some scary legislation when it comes to parents' rights.
Yeah, this legislation is chilling. It really is, that something like this could pass. That parents who just are trying to parent their child the way they were born biologically, and prevent their child from making life-altering and, in some cases, life-ruining decisions. And those parents could be taken out of the equation altogether if this legislation passes. So now it goes to the Senate, and looks like perhaps the Senate would pass it, and that even the governor would sign it. And it's just kind of astounding. It's really astounding that they would take away parental rights in this kind of nature. So like you said, Brent Leatherwood and Mike Proud got together and wrote a letter to the Colorado legislature expressing their problems with this bill and why. And the letter said, Colorado has garnered a reputation as a state that is hostile to Christians and other people of faith who adhere to biblical teaching and biological realities on matters such as marriage, family, and sexuality. While these actions have all thankfully been struck down by courts, the legislation before you would codify the anti-Christian moves we have seen in recent years. Is such animus toward people of faith the kind of legacy you want to leave for Colorado?
Yeah.
So yeah, we will be for sure watching that. It's like I said, just chilling. It's almost hard to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to shift a gear here. And we mentioned earlier about the Serve Tour in Virginia Beach, Virginia. That happened in late March. And, when you have lots of folks coming to serve in lots of different places and lots of gospel conversations come in, it takes a little bit of time to gather up all that information. And so we have that. Even though the event happened March the 28th and 29th, we've got that for you. And Laura, it is encouraging. We just start out right at the top. 28 people who came to the Serve Tour, for various reasons, ended up making professions for Christ as they heard the gospel. And certainly we know that many more. In fact, the Sin folks say that at the Serve Tour there were over 1,100 gospel conversations carried out there. And so, that's a lot of people talking about Jesus to other folks. And so that is very encouraging.
These Serve Tours are always, I love to read about them because you always hear about how many churches are involved. Like there were 58 churches involved in this thing from 13 states.
Yeah, wow.
And 865 volunteers. And they did everything from helping renovate some rooms in a school to what they call a grill walk, which makes me laugh. Basically, they just take a grill on the back of on a trailer and they just drive through a neighborhood real slow and people are walking beside it and there's somebody grilling hamburgers on the grill and they're just passing them out to people and they call it a grill walk.
Yeah.
But they're drawing a crowd. People will come to get a free hamburger and then they can engage them and talk to them about the gospel. And so all kind of cool stuff you can do on a Serve Tour.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you'd like to learn more about those, go to sinrelief.org and you can get more information on Serve Tours that are coming up for the remainder of 2025. All right, Laura, Easter weekend here and a couple of significant things happening for churches that have needed Send Relief, that they have needed DR help over the last couple of years and even in the last few months. And this one that we're going to mention now, it hits really close to home for me. It's in Mayfield, Kentucky. And if you'll remember in December of 2021, Mayfield, Kentucky, it was the downtown area of that small western Kentucky town was just obliterated. But among just a few structures left standing was First Baptist Church of Mayfield, Kentucky. But even though the structurally it was still standing, there was a lot of damage inside. And so that was, I came to the Baptist Press and to the executive committee in August of 2021. And that was one of the very first kind of stories outside of what was happening with the executive committee that I just sort of camped out on and filed a number of stories from Western Kentucky.
You missed our office Christmas party that year.
I did.
But I got to go to Mayfield.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I was doing a tour of this building with Wes Fowler, who was the pastor there during that specific time. And it was heart-wrenching. But patience and determination, perseverance, the faithfulness of the Lord, it pays off. And so this coming Easter Sunday, just a couple of days from now, they are planning to worship again in their church facility there in Mayfield, Kentucky. A very, very unusual, unique way. The entire congregation is going to meet up in the street outside of the building.
I love this.
And that they're going to pray and they're going to just have some words together from their current pastor there, whose name is Paul Wilkerson, and then Wes Fowler, who is now the state exec in Missouri. They'll both be there, and the church is going to re-enter the building together after they've been over at a local high school for a number of months, carrying out their worship service, or a number of years, I should say, carrying out their worship services. And here's the, it's going to be fantastic for them to be back in their facility, to be able to worship, to be able to be together in that that way. But even more so on Easter Sunday morning, they're planning to celebrate 8 baptisms together in that service. Just a fantastic way to re-enter that church property and to just celebrate God's faithfulness to them, even in the midst of such difficult circumstances.
I really loved what the pastor said, what Paul Wilkerson said in this story. $22 million, a newly renovated facility, but it means nothing because in 15 seconds it can all be gone again.
Yeah.
And it helps them keep their perspective that making much of Christ is what they want to do, because it's not about this building, even though they're very thankful to be back in their building. But something like that will just give you perspective about how temporary really everything is.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Well, not too far from Mayfield, Kentucky, down in Tennessee, over on the other side of the state, so in East Tennessee, there's a church there, Riverview Baptist Church, that's been without their church facility for about 6 months now because of Hurricane Helene. And those folks celebrated April the 13th, the ability to re-enter their facility. And so they got a week's head start to prepare to celebrate.
They got there on Palm Sunday.
That's right. There you go. They waved those palm branches as they went into that fully restored church building. And so we're excited for them, and just the faithfulness of the Lord to be with his church like he says he would. He does that, and he is so faithful to show us that it's not about the building, but at the same time to be blessed by having a building and having a facility and having the freedom to gather together in that building. And so we celebrate with those churches in Tennessee and Kentucky. And as we thought about these stories this week, I wondered if there are other churches that have been affected by devastation, storm, tragedy, and so we celebrate with you. If you know of one that we've not mentioned or written a story about in Baptist Press, we're excited to hear about those things in the days going forward. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, speaking of the resurrection, let's go back. We started in Texas with the annual meeting and Clint Pressley's potential nomination there at the annual meeting, and now let's come back to Texas, to Prestonwood Baptist, where they have a staff apologist at Prestonwood Baptist Church. His name is Jeremiah Johnston, and he's been doing an interesting series and a church emphasis on the resurrection leading up to Easter Sunday.
Yeah, I thought this was just a really good reminder for all of us. He says, I'll just read what his quote. The resurrection of Jesus is tragically undertaught, underpreached, and as a result, underappreciated and underapplied by the vast majority of Jesus followers and pastors. He said, apart from Easter weekend or funeral messages, it often becomes a footnote rather than the focal point of modern preaching. And I tend to agree with that. I think if you grew up in church, you just have heard it all your life, and you've sung about it, and it's easy to maybe lose the awe, the wonder of that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah.
The only person ever in history to do that. And that our whole faith is in vain if that isn't true. It's really the bedrock of everything. And so he just encourages people to kind of start from there. When you're talking about the gospel with people, start from the resurrection.
Yeah.
And he said that even the number of times pastors mention it doesn't keep up with the Bible, because in the New Testament, it's mentioned 300 times, more than 300 times.
Yeah.
And so you just almost can't talk about it enough, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to just kind of make a point. So sometimes Laura and I debate back and forth about how much kind of, inside baseball to give you on the podcast, but this is one I'm going to take just a second and talk about. So in that story, you'll notice that there is a capital R when it comes to the word resurrection, if you go to Baptist Press and read that story. And when you see that word right there, know that was a 15 or 20-minute conversation of me standing in Laura's office talking about whether or not this word resurrection should have a capital R. And we came to the point to where, we typically go by the AP style guide when it comes to Baptist Press and our style guide. We make some modifications because of our convictions and things like that. But we really made one on this one. And so we talked about this, the word resurrection has a capital R in this story, Because it's a historical event, a significant historical event. We talked about how if you were to write World War I or World War II, that those letters, the W's, would be capitalized because there's only one World War I in the history of the world and only one World War II in the history of the world. And so we made a determination today that we were going to capitalize the word R in this story because there's only been one resurrection day.
Mm-hmm.
There's only been one resurrection to happen in human history. And so we don't want you to think about the concept or the theory, to some degree, even the hope of the resurrection. We want you to think about the resurrection that has happened as
The
a
reality.
historical
Yeah.
event.
Yeah.
So,
It's like any other historical event that has a proper noun, good or bad, And Renaissance is one that I mentioned, when I was sort of advocating for capitalizing it, because it really happened. It's a real event. It's a real mark in history. In fact, divides history in two. It's the hinge point of all of history. So,
yeah.
I think going forward, maybe we will try to capitalize it every time.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway, I'm going to move on. I feel like I'm shifting into preacher mode just a little bit. Be careful of that.
Go ahead. Come on.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's go to the SBC calendar. Following Easter Sunday is April the 27th, and that is scheduled to be Baptism Sunday. Hopefully you've been talking about that. I've seen some discussion about that on social media in a few places here and there. So that's April the 27th. Just around the corner, May 1st is the National Day of Prayer. And then May 4th has been dubbed as Seminary Sunday. And so we hope that those are some things that you and your church family can think about and participate in as we move forward over the next few weeks. That brings us, Laura, to the history moment. And let's see what you got.
All right. It was hard to find something this week. There's a lot of good ones, but I picked this one.
Okay.
This is State Line, April 21st, 1989.
Okay.
Southern Baptist top $1 billion for foreign missions offering. So this is when the Lottie Moon Christmas offering topped cumulatively $1 billion, not M, billion dollars. Wow. This is probably the single most exciting news in the Southern Baptist Convention in the past 12 months, said Brotherhood Commission President James Smith. It is an expression of who Southern Baptists are and what we were all about. The WMU director, Carolyn Weatherford, said, "This is tremendous news. Southern Baptists have a reason to be ecstatic. Reaching the $1 billion mark is a watershed in the history of Southern Baptists." So this is interesting because it kind of goes on to say, at the closer, further down in the story, of the $1 billion collected thus far, cumulatively, 55% has been given in the decade of the 1980s, because this was 1989. So more than half was given in. So this was also the 100th anniversary, mind you, of Lottie Moon Christmas offering in 1989. Okay. So in 100 years, more than half of that $1 billion had been given in the previous 9 years.
Wow.
Now, since then, the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, you might remember, crossed $2 billion sometime around 2000. And then in April of 2021, so now we're talking 4 years ago, it crossed $5 billion.
Wow.
And so it was just interesting to me to see the exponential nature of the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, because it took it all the way. It took it 100 years to get to 1 billion, but then it only took it like 40 something more years to get to 5 billion.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, since it's Easter time, I have to look up the Annie total too, the Annie Armstrong. And that reached in September of 2021, it reached its cumulative 2 billion number.
Wow. Okay.
And so I would just encourage you, if you haven't given yet to your Annie Armstrong Easter offering this year, do so. And already be planning what you're going to give to your Lottie Moon Christmas offering this year. Because those have just, it's just they've grown, and it took 100 years to get to 1 billion, but now we're at over 5 billion. It's just like, it just blows your mind. I just thought that was really fun, and I loved to read what those leaders back in 1989 were saying about just how ecstatic, they used the word ecstatic, they were about this total, and how blown away must they be now that it's over 5 billion, It was fun to think about.
Absolutely. Southern Baptists are generous people.
Yeah.
Definitely, for sure. And so we're thankful for that. They show up and they put their money where their mouth is when it comes to what they believe and the hope that they have in the gospel. And so I'm excited to be a part of that.
Well, Brandon, always we have a lot of news that we didn't even get to talk about. I know that there is a New Orleans Seminary trustee story coming that we haven't seen yet. I know there's just all kind of stuff happening all the time. And you can see all of these stories and beautiful photos with many of them and all of this and much, much more at baptistpress.com. Thanks for listening, and happy capital R Resurrection Sunday.